Hey guys, tonight we sprawl out our weary limbs and drift back a few hundred years, right into the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where the lamps flicker, and where coffee smells strong enough to keep poets rhyming past dawn. We're going to stroll together through stone streets and through the warmth of a marketplace, but only gently, because, let's face it, you probably wouldn't survive this place if we dunked you here unprepared. The traffic alone carts, donkeys, and shouting sellers would test even the most caffeinated nerves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment where you're listening from and what the clock says where you are. It's always oddly comforting to imagine night owls and early birds scattered across the globe, all trying to nod off together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing at the edge of an Ottoman bazaar, somewhere in the middle of the 17th century. The air smells of roasted nuts, of honey, of soap and dye, and above all of coffee brewing in tall, slender copper pots. Lanterns sway from doorways, flickering like little messengers who've had too much caffeine themselves. Stalls sell everything from shawls to sesame, from sandalwood combs to dry apricots. Yet you're drawn, without even meaning to be, to that aroma. Rich, earthy, something between roasted bread crust and burnt sugar. It curls through the air and catches your nose like a polite but insistent tug. Your shoes crunch on stone, smooth where thousands of feet have rubbed it, echoing faintly under the arches. Merchants call out invitations, not just to buy things you don't need, but apparently to save your very soul with unbeatable prices. A boy scurries past, balancing a tray stacked with tiny cups, steam streaming into the night. You realize the coffee isn't just a drink here. It's an errand, a messenger service, a reason for gossip delivery. It's funny. In a way, most of human history runs on the quiet rhythm of bread and sleep. But right here, you're standing at the moment when the world discovers what happens if you stir roasted beans into your evening instead. You get company, arguments, laughter, worry, maybe even rebellion, or at least a slightly jittery poet. There's something warm about these lamps, smoky though they are. Oil lanterns cast puddles of gold on the stonework. The glow isn't steady, it quivers, like the flame is nervous about keeping up with the chatter of the market. If you were an actual person in this exact year, it would be your job to walk carefully, keep your robe out of puddles, guard your few coins with vigilance, and say polite things to neighbors. But since you're visiting safely, as our soft-focused traveler, you can drift along, coat trailing, basket swinging. No danger at all? Somewhere ahead, a man in a long robe keeps stirring a pot bigger than you want to think about. He dips a ladle and pours rich, dark liquid into a row of tiny cups that barely hold more than 2 sips. This is the Ottoman Bruno filters. No milk, no gentle frothing. Just ground beans boiled hard in water until it tastes both like truth and like punishment, followed by a sludge that settles at the bottom like a quiet dare. You don't notice it yet, but the scent has not only filled it has filled entire cities, calling workers, poets, and philosophers with equal strength. One fact is certain: by the early 1500s, coffee houses were weaving themselves into this empire's fabric, and by the 1600s, they were already both adored and suspicious. People said coffee could help poets compose, merchants negotiate, and lovers stay up, whispering through whole nights. But there were mutters of worry too. Officials whispered about how staying awake long into the hours gave people more time to think. People thinking too freely. Dangerous. Perhaps they should be steered to sit more quietly, with fewer conspiratorial laughs. You keep walking through the rows of lanterns, and the detail you notice which fewer people today recall is that some sellers here are offering strange twists on the drink. Cardamom sprinkled in, or sugar pulled across hot coals until it crusts, or rose water to soften the bitterness. A confection for night wanderers, who still pretend the bitterness is foretaste sophistication rather than sheer survival. Asterisk. The heat of the lamps mixes with the warmth of brewing pots. Children tug at father's sleeves, begging for sweets. Women balance trays of bread just pulled from stone ovens. You're drawn, not just for the taste, but for the mood of it. The way the sound of copper cups clinking is like a soft percussion beating underneath all the chatter. The taste of waiting for something to happen. Asterisk. By now, you're probably wondering if a person could actually fall asleep after drinking so much of this mysterious brew. Historical answers vary. Some poets flat out claim they did not need sleep, preferring rhymes over dreams. Others admitted, sheepishly, that the energy lasted half the night, then troughs of drowsiness deep as any morning fog swept in. Historians still wonder, was the coffeehouse about the drink? Or was the drink simply the password that allowed people to stay together longer into the night than rules otherwise allowed? Asterisk. The thought lingers as you pause beneath a lantern that sputters, and for a second, you see your shadow stretch across the stall. It's a lanky shadow taller than you are. Or at least, that's how your tired eyes frame it tanned. It looks as if it might step on without you. You consider following it all the way to the door of a little coffeehouse tucked behind the market stalls. You notice the warm glow spilling out the low doorway, the sound of lute strings plinking, the murmurs of people laughing softly and talking with long pauses. Asterisk. The smell of coffee is stronger here, crusted with smoke and spice, almost enough to replace a meal. You feel someone pass behind you with a tray of cups, and the steam almost sings briefly across your cheeks. When you step closer to the low doorway, a young man laughs to himself and a small cluster of friends, and repeats a rhyming couplet too quickly to catch. You realize you are right on the edge of the doorway, where people will not only drink, but stay awake until lantern oil has run out, and words themselves seem to be the only furniture that lasts. Asterisk. The entrance seems to invite you. After all, the night stretches long, and the taste of bitterness is waiting. Tonight, it's your story too. You step inside, and instantly the air changes texture, as though smoke, chatter, and coffee have braided into one soft, buzzing fabric. The room is low lit, with lanterns hanging like tired fireflies in protective cages. Wooden beams hold the ceiling in place, beams that seem to sag politely under the weight of centuries. The smell of coffee, thick, bitter, smooth and punishing, wraps itself around your head like a wool blanket that somehow whispers, "You'll never want plain water again." Asterisk. Someone presses a small porcelain cup into your hand before you can protest. It's no larger than a thimble, barely enough to wet your lips twice. The porcelain is painted with blue vines, their loops as delicate as your heartbeat slowing in this warm, enclosed place. "Taste," the man says, before moving on. Clearly assuming you belong here. Asterisk. You tilt the cup toward your mouth, and the first sip is an entire lecture in bitterness. Your taste buds declare an emergency, but almost at once, another dimension rolls in deep, rich, smoky, a hint of chocolate without the sugar, maybe even a whisper of burnt caramel. This is Ottoman-style preparation, unfiltered, brewed long over coals, until the liquid is dark enough to drown secrets. The grounds drift silently to the bottom, thick as wet sand, meaning half your cup is drink, and half is future fortune-telling material. Asterisk. Everywhere you look, men and women pair these tiny cups with slow conversation. Poets lean back like emperors of thought, quoting lines that sound magnificent, though you privately suspect some of them just rhyme moon with June in Turkish. Tradesmen compare notes from the marketplace, slipping in jokes that make their neighbors thump the low tables with laughter. Behind them, a hulking pot bubbles on hot coals, tended by an impatient attendant whose only job is to keep the coffee coming, and frowns at anyone bold enough to ask for water instead. Asterisk. Fact time. Coffee entered the Ottoman world from Yemen. sometime in the mid-15th century, then blossomed into a citywide habit in Istanbul not long after. Its speed was astonishing. In just decades, coffee houses sprang up like mushrooms after rain, a quirky detail. Coffee was so integral that court astrologers feared its popularity might disturb people's natural sleep schedules, predicting heavenly chaos as if Jupiter himself needed 8 solid hours. One wonders if planets also run cranky without rest. Asterisk, you blow gently across the surface of your second sip. The heat still rolls stubbornly over your tongue, but it's manageable, almost friendly now. Around you, the hum of the room rises, lute strings playing softly from a corner. Merchants argue lightly over sailing dates, and someone nearer to the fire recounts a silly story about a goat herder who once blamed caffeinated goats for keeping him awake. You blink, realizing you've heard a version of that origin tale from Ethiopia, the one about goats dancing after nibbling beans. But whether it's a fable or fact, no one here minds. The story makes people smile, which is proof enough. Asterisk, curiously, the tiny cups don't calm like tea. They spark something instead. Your eyelids may blink heavily in this lantern-lit air, yet your mind, your inner chatterbox, feels brighter, more awake, as if each sip adds a candle. Historians still wonder, did ordinary Ottoman citizens actually stay awake later thanks to all this coffee? Or did the ritual simply make evenings feel more magical, regardless of bedtime? Is wakefulness the point, or just the loveliest excuse to avoid chores? Asterisk, you swirl the last of the liquid, watching coffee grounds form shapes on the bottom mountains, rivers, a fig perhaps, or just your imagination. Someone notices and nudges you knowingly. Fortune tellers sometimes read cups like these, predicting love, riches, or even a lengthy argument with mother. You consider asking what the shapes say about your future, but refrain, remembering that your actual plan tonight is just to soak quietly in this Ottoman pulse. Asterisk, around you, the mood rides the line between lively and drowsy. Dark eyes gleam in the fire's reflection, jaws break into soft laughter, cups clink gently against saucers, almost as if the coffee house itself is purring contentedly. The second sip lingers now, coating your tongue, your lips, sliding into a familiar bitterness that feels less like punishment, more like invitation. Asterisk, and as you sit there, cradling porcelain, you realize your journey into wakeful nights has truly begun. Asterisk, the door closes softly behind you, and the hum of the bazaar fades into the rough, warm chatter of the coffee house. At first, it feels like stepping into a pocket of night carved away from the city outside. The air is heavy with smoke, roasted beans, and the faint sweetness of tobacco curling in from pipes. Long benches line the sides of the room, cushioned with fabrics and reds and browns, worn thin from hours of shoulders leaning, backs slumping, and poets pretending they're deeply, gravely important. Asterisk, you lower yourself into a corner seat, the wood cool beneath your hands. Around you, conversations ripple like tiny streams feeding into the same river. At one table, stern men play with strings of prayer beads, not always praying, more often counting their own wit as each bead clicks. At another, scholars lean close, trading thoughts so dense you suspect they've already put each other to sleep, but in the politest way. Asterisk, and in between, energy hums. Laughter bursts suddenly from the far side of the room, laughter that's less roaring guffaw and more soft chuckling chorus, like the sound of pillows talking about you behind your back. Pipes glow, cups raise, heads tilt. You realize you might be the only one in the room not pretending to belong here. Luckily, history has granted you invisibility tonight. You're not judged on how clever your metaphors are, nor whether your robe is pressed. Instead, you can sit quietly and watch shadows knit themselves over flickering walls. Asterisk. The word Kovahain slips to mind, the word for these coffee houses. They are not temples, though arguments are worshipped more than once. They are not taverns, though the laughter here rivals any barrel-lit gathering. Instead, they are a curious crossroads, a workshop for talk, a hospital for boredom, a university for anyone who can stay awake. Asterisk. One fact that might amuse you. These coffee houses were sometimes called schools of the wise, even though most nights involved arguments about whether one man's beard oil smelled more like rose or goat. Still, it's fitting into this smoky pocket of warmth. People dragged stories and questions, setting them on the tables like extra dishes, over bread crusts and swirling cups. Knowledge was exchanged, some factual, some invented, all stitched into a collective rhythm. Asterisk A. Small detail that slips beneath the notice of history books. Men here often doodled verses or spirals of thought into the dust spilled on tables. Between coffee grounds and ashtrays sat entire poems drawn and blown away before a dawn sweep. Words that lived barely an hour, but left stains in the air much longer. Asterisk. You notice your eyes adjusting to the dim, catching finer features. Carpets stretch along the floor, patterned with bright diamonds hiding beneath shoe scuffs. Somewhere to your left, a dulcet voice recites a stanza, and half the room turns an earweather for the poetry itself, or just the confident way the man brags his rhymes. It's hard to say. You hide a smile. Coffee houses were famous for this: a stage without a stage. Poets elbowing into the air for attention, while their friends dramatically sighed as though startled by genius. Asterisk. What historians disagree on, even now, is whether women frequented these spaces as much as men. Most records emphasize male customers, yet accounts also tell of kitchens in wealthier homes that doubled as private coffee corners for gatherings of women. Just as sharp-tongued, just as witty, were the public spaces truly closed to them, or just written as though they were invisible? In your quiet seat, you imagine both spaces bloomed, one noted, one overlooked together, fueling the same culture of sleepless talk. Asterisk. The air hums with pipe smoke, harsh but somehow soothing, like incense with a sense of humor. You cough lightly, then conceal it, as if someone will call you out for not inhaling with enough charisma. A nearby cup clinks as it's set down, the echo ringing longer than expected. For just a heartbeat, silence hovers us, though the room itself is poised for the next revelation. Then, quickly, murmurs resume. Laughter rises. Someone strikes the lute again. Asterisk. Your eyelids know it is night, drooping gently, but your mind feels alert in this warm labyrinth of shadow and sound. It's the contradiction that powered these spaces, bodies longing for bed, minds refusing to cave. Asterisk. You cradle your empty porcelain and wonder if you'll ask for another, but for now, you linger in the shadows, letting the murmured rhymes and debates wash over your ears. This is not your world, yet tonight, it is. You slide a little deeper into your corner seat, half draped in shadow, half warmed by the lantern glow, and there they are, the poets. You notice them before they ever notice you, mostly because they are louder than the lute player, and nearly as radiant as the lamp flames. They lean back like men who have never once worried about rent, letting words tumble from their mouths like coins. Every line a glitter, every rhyme an attempted jewel. Asterisk. Ottoman poets knew how to stretch a midnight until sunrise. One sip of coffee, and they proclaimed themselves prophets of language. Another sip, and the metaphors started to wobble, transforming nightingales into mountains and moonlight into tax receipts, often without any sense of transition. You chuckle quietly, because while everyone pretends the verse is profound, you suspect at least half the listeners are here simply for the fun of hearing someone wrestle with vocabulary while their brain buzzes on caffeine. Asterisk. A fact drops gently into your mind. Among the Ottomans, poets really were considered cultural architects. They molded language itself, often employed by courts to immortalize sultans' deeds or add sparkle to celebrations. But here, in smoky coffee houses, they shed their courtly duties, brewing rhymes not about emperors but about everyday irritations like cold winter mornings, ungrateful neighbors, and boots that never dried in time. Poetry was performed like theater, sparkling under the lanterns while the rest of the empire tried to sleep. Asterisk, your cup is refilled without ceremony. Bitter liquid slicks across your tongue again, grounding you to the chatter. You listen closer now, eyebrow arched as one poet slams his tiny cup down with dramatic force and declares he would rather never close his eyes again than miss the perfect rhyme. You imagine him explaining this at home, with a tired spouse rolling their eyes and muttering that perhaps he should miss a rhyme or two in exchange for being less cranky at breakfast. Asterisk A. Curious detail that doesn't always make it into neat history. These poets sometimes kept notebooks, but more often, they leaned on memory and the merciless attentiveness of their peers. If someone flubbed a line, it lived on forever in the quiet snickers of rivals, who would repeat mistakes like secret curses for years. A kind of poetic memory, bank-written but impossibly sharp. Asterisk, the night thickens as verses unfurl. Words of roses, of spring breezes, of sorrowing hearts, those endless sorrowing hearts. You count 3 in just one stanza and decide that perhaps caffeine fueled melodrama as much as genius. And yet, in watching them, you notice your own mind is both softened and sharpened. Their rhymes are the background hum, and you are folded gently into it, like sugar dissolving in this layered, bitter brew. Asterisk, historians argue here too. Were these poets sharpening minds toward revolution, planting subtle ideas between lyrical sighs, or were they simply the stand-up comedians of their era, keeping sleepless drinkers entertained while the empire's gears turned elsewhere? No firm answer ever settled, just the warm echo of couplets floating long after the lantern oil waned. Asterisk, one poet, thin as a reed, waves his arms wide, reciting something about the moon refusing to climb higher in the sky unless offered coffee itself. The room bursts into laughter, not because it's genius, but because it feels precisely right that coffee might sway planets, or at least poet schedules. Asterisk, the lute strikes again, bridging melody with recited rhyme, the tuning drifting like threads into the air. Your cheeks flush faintly with the drink's heat, your heart slowing but mind sharpening, like a lantern flame focusing toward one steady wick. Outside, the bazaar is likely dimming, stalls shutting, donkeys snoring in their dusty shelters. But here, shadows sway in warm patterns, and these poets swear they will not stop until the night either bursts from exhaustion or turns into a new dawn. Asterisk, for your part, you lean quietly, resting elbows to knees, sipping again as your eyelids weigh heavy even through the buzz. You can't decide whether coffee fuels defiance against sleep or merely frames its arrival with extra drama. But perhaps that's the very point. Asterisk, asterisk, the room grows steadily louder, though not from arguing merchants or over-caffeinated poets this time. Now the sound belongs to the unexpected charm of instruments and orchestra without velvet curtains, scattered right here among clinking cups and swirling smoke. Asterisk, at first, you think the noise is just another hum of chatter, but then a clear note from a lute breaks through, like a string of silver unfurling across the coffee house. The melody is gentle, winding, as if someone plucked sunlight still caught in the streets outside and tucked it into sound. A subtle drum answers dum 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 steady as the heartbeat you're trying to slow. Then comes the ney flute, its breathy sigh weaving through the air like a breeze sneaking into a closed room. Suddenly, you realize this isn't chatter with background strumming. This is a concert. Asterisk, the audience, if you can call them that, doesn't clap or cheer. They listen with faces soft as the lantern glow. Music here isn't performance, it's breathing. The men playing aren't dressed with performers' pride. They're neighbors, merchants, sometimes even poets caught between the coffee house is orchestra pit, living room, and dream space all at once. It's enough to make even your own heart beat. Rhythm along, though you might prefer a slower tempo than the drum insists upon, since you are, technically, trying to wind down. Asterisk, historically speaking, Ottoman coffeehouses were famous for more than poetry. They hosted music, shadow plays, chess games, even gossip masquerading as philosophy. The soundscape mattered just as much as the taste of coffee. Music, especially, stole into the mix. Sometimes employing whole choirs of instruments, other times just one friend with a lute, lifting song into smoky rafters. The echoes clung to beams, then spilled like honey through the room until it pooled around your chair. Asterisk. Tonight's quirky detail. Sometimes these performances evolved into mashups, though of a much earlier brand, poets reciting lines over musicians improvising behind them. Was it art or caffeine-induced chaos? No one kept score, perhaps because no one wanted to. The point wasn't to win admiration. It was to stretch night into something extraordinary. A man sets down his tiny coffee coupling can, in the same motion, taps a rhythm on the wooden bench, syncing with the drum. Across the room, another chuckles as the lute player plucks an especially cheeky note, one that feels suspiciously like the musical version of a wink. You can't help smiling. This is less concert hall, more jam session with neighbors who forgot they had early carpentry shifts in the morning. Asterisk. The music grows lively, a playful rise, then softens again. The nay sighs so long your own chest expands in sympathy. And suddenly, you realize, this is why the poets managed to ignore sleep. Not just the coffee, not just the rhymes. This gentle flood of sound turns fatigue into scenery. Fatigue becomes something you row through, across an ocean of plucked strings. Asterisk. Historians still debate whether music in coffeehouses was tolerated merrily, or frowned upon sternly by stricter officials. Did these sounds encourage too much freedom, too much joy, even whispers against authority? No one agrees. What they do agree on is that the music happened, regardless, night after night, weaving unrecorded concerts that slipped across centuries and into imagination. Asterisk. The orchestra at your side drifts toward softer patterns now. The drum becomes heartbeat. Again dum, dum, dum. The lute plays slower, letting silence stretch between chords. The nay sighs with less breath, like someone finally laying a blanket across the night. Somewhere near your shoulder, quiet humming joins the lull. Not in tune, but entirely sincere. Asterisk. Your cup is once again empty, and you consider asking for a refill. But something about this moment whispers not to. You're no longer drinking coffee. You're drinking sound, shadow, warmth. Laughter ebbs, voices soften, as though even the poets understand the music tonight deserves more space than their rhymes. For the first time in this strange, sleepless empire, you feel that peculiar paradox. In a place built for staying awake, drowsiness, soft and calm, has found you anyway. The music tapers into silence, like the room itself slowly exhaling. And for a moment everything seems perfectly balanced. Lanterns glow steady, cups rest empty, shadows sigh into corners. Then, inevitably, voices rise again only. Now, they're lower, conspiratorial, whispered across small tables in ways that make you lean forward despite yourself. The mood shifts. You can almost taste it in the bitter air, something between secrecy and gossip. Asterisk. You've drifted right into one of the quiet realities of Ottoman coffeehouse life, not just merriment and music, but murmurs of suspicion, of rules and order, bending or breaking at the edges. For you, of course, this is just story time. For your historical hosts, these hushed conversations are tethered to real nerves. Coffeehouses were, after all, places where strangers gathered, and wherever strangers gather, officials grow suspicious. Asterisk. Fact. More than once, Ottoman authorities tried to ban coffee altogether. They claimed it overstimulated people, that it encouraged idleness, because heaven forbid tailors relax, or even that it was spiritually dangerous. Some preachers likened coffee to wine, lumping it into the same forbidden category. And yet, here you are, watching three men argue with equal parts caffeine and confidence about whether they could last more than 1 week without their nightly cups. Their conclusion, of course, is a resounding no. Asterisk, but behind the laughter, whispers run deeper. You catch stray words. Sultan, tax, justice, muffled under coughs and chuckles. The kind of talk that, officially, shouldn't happen outside closed, careful walls. Historians still puzzle over whether coffeehouses truly fueled revolutionary thought, or if that's simply smoke from officials. Paranoia. Did late-night fuel really turn to defiant ideas? Or did men just like complaining over hot drinks, much as people do now? Asterisk, a humorous little detail floats to you in a nearby conversation. One customer insists the loudest punishment for talking politics should be having to drink a cup of week-old grounds, reheated. His friends groan dramatically, treating such a fate as worse than prison. You laugh too, quietly, receiving a few glances of approval from nearby listeners who must assume you agree that reheated coffee is a crime against humanity. Some truths are timeless. Asterisk, the attendants bustle quietly, sliding through the heavy smoke with more cups balanced on trays. You realize the coffeehouse is carefully arranged. No tall chairs, no high tables. Everything keeps people at eye level, nose to nose, encouraging intimacy, but also dangers. Secrets are shared here as easily as jokes, and whether those secrets remain inside these four walls is another matter entirely. Asterisk, you lean back, exhaling along with a dozen others as the conversation calms again, flowing toward ordinary rhythms. Tales of trade routes, ship delays in the port, even a campaign of a local tax collector gone terribly wrong. Whispers about politics turn into chuckles about misdelivered goods, as safely wrapped in humor as possible. This is how coffee houses protected their own pulse, never too explosive, always sliding back into levity before trouble could build. Asterisk, still, you can't shake the edge the night has taken. The shadows, for all their warmth, seem slightly lengthened. The lanterns quiver, the lute remains silent, and voices drop when outsiders brush past the door. For a second, you imagine what it might feel like to sit here in truth, not safely as tonight's dreamlike traveler, to risk being overheard, to sip coffee with one hand holding the cup and the other pressing down unease. Asterisk, and yet, in this exact moment, you also sense the boldness of it. It's thrilling knowing officials worry. You might be scheming, but deciding anyway to keep pouring, keep whispering, keep inventing half-serious debates about rulers, about rules, about whether morning will bring anything more than a foggy head. Asterisk, this is the part of history that feels human to the bone. They weren't heroes here in the shadows. They were ordinary people, wide awake, mixing fear with laughter, rebellion with entertainment, politics with poetry, and coffee with everything. Asterisk, you close your eyes for a moment as the newest cup arrives, its steam rising into your hair. The bitterness hits your nose again, anchoring you not, drowning fear, not sparking revolt, just reminding you that night was meant for more than silence. Here's suspicion, laughter, music, verse, it all steeps together. Sip too fast, and you'll burn your tongue. Sip carefully, and you might just last until dawn. Asterisk, asterisk, your next refill arrives, steaming in its delicate porcelain. But this time, something is different. The bitter black liquid glimmers with a strange reddish hue as the attendant drops a single pod of cardamom into the cup. A thin curl of spice floats upward, soft and floral, threading through the room's heavier smoke. You tilt your head, sniff carefully, and feel as though someone has just spritzed the air with comfort itself. Asterisk, it's not just coffee anymore, it's an experiment, a potion, a tiny alchemy show playing out in front of you. Ottoman coffeehouses were notorious for this, adding twists both sensible and utterly peculiar to the brew. Cardamom was common, turning each swallow into a mix of bold and soothing. Any seeds here and there added faint sweetness. Even clove or saffron found their way into lucky cups. Sometimes sugar, sometimes molasses, boiling into caramel strings that hardened and cracked sweetly at the base of your cup. Other times, you'd taste rosewater, as though your tongue had just taken a leisurely stroll through someone's flower garden. Asterisk, tonight you try a sip, and it's like being punched politely in the nose by perfume. You laugh under your breath, slightly embarrassed, as if other drinkers might notice your failed composure. Across the room, an old man does exactly what you just did, sniffs too hard, sneezes lightly, then shrugs and sips again. Clearly it's a hazard of flavored coffee enthusiasm. You're in good company. Asterisk, here's your slice of fact. Additions like sugar and spice weren't just for show. They were heavily tied to trade. Sugar from distant Mediterranean plantations. Spices moving along Red Sea routes and Persian caravans. Each grain stirred into the coffee cup was a silent reflection of empires colliding somewhere far beyond this smoky little room. Every sip contained not just taste, but geography. Asterisk, what you don't always hear in the neat history version is just how trendy these extras became. People argued not just about politics, but about whether cardamom was superior to cinnamon, whether rosewater was refined or simply gaudy. Entire debates, caffeine-fueled and spice-soaked, over whose coffee order reflected better taste. Sound familiar? You realize, with a smile, that coffee snobs aren't a modern invention. They're at least 4 centuries old. Asterisk, for a moment, the room feels lighter. The suspicion that clung earlier softens. The heated debates cooled by aromatic steam. The poet in the corner raises his cup dramatically and proclaims that the addition of cardamom was what gave him the ability to outlast mere mortals. His friends nod indulgently, though someone mutters that he'd say the same if there was chalk in his drink. Asterisk, the quirky thing is, many believed these additions also had medicinal qualities, good for digestion, good for the chest, good for hearts bruised by too much nighttime rhyme. Was it true? Historians still wonder. Maybe it was placebo. Maybe some herbs genuinely soothed stomachs, twisted from too much bitter brew. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the pure comfort of pretended healthiness that made people fall asleep easier the next day. Like saying, yes, this candy bar counts as fruit because it contains peanuts. Asterisk. The coffee before you looks ordinary again, now dark, surface broken only by rippling steam. Yet as you sip, the cardamom flavor lingers, light and exotic, changing what bitterness means. You wonder how many cups one person might drink here before stumbling out into dawn with breath that smells more like someone's spice cabinet than simple roasted bean. As the night deepens, benches creak, laughter bubbles softly again, and someone circulates small plates of candied fruit, sticky, jewel-like, perfect companions to the cardamom cup in your hand. Your laughter joins theirs more easily, the room less foreign and more tender. You realize how human it is to want variety in the middle of ritual. Same beans, same boiling pot, night after night, but tweak it as just a little adventure before sleep refuses to come. Asterisk. And so you lean back, cradling your fragrant, slightly mischievous drink, feeling it blend smoke, spice, and centuries of trade into something oddly calming beneath it all. You've had enough coffee now that your senses are humming, your ears pick up even the shuffle of slippers across the floor. Your nose traces out the spicy threads of cardamom from earlier, and your eyes shift easily between gleaming lanterns and dim corners. It's in that half-alert, half-drowsy state that you notice a few newcomers sliding into the room. Their clothes set them apart, not locals from the next quarter, but travelers, merchants, story-carriers. They plant themselves at a low round table, tugging off dusty shoes, as though their feet have walked the entire empire twice this week. They gesture to the attendant, who is already producing cups before the words are out. And then you, here at the magic of nights like these. The one thing almost as prized as fresh coffee beans: stories. Wandering merchants were the human newspapers of their day, and the coffee houses, the reading rooms. You sip while pretending not to stare, but soon your ears are leaning closer, like curious children under a blanket. Their voices wrap the night in new shapes. One man tells of caravans spilling across the great desert, camels loaded with saffron, ivory trinkets, and bags of Yemeni beans heavier than stone. He speaks of winds so hot they cracked the skin in half a day, and oases where sparkling water felt like the promise of paradise. Another merchant interrupts, claiming he saw sailors unloading cargo in Alexandria, swearing their ship nearly capsized from the combined weight of peppercorns and Turkish delight. A ripple of laughter spreads around the table, part disbelief, part delight, because exaggeration is as necessary to storytelling as the steam rising from their cups. And here's a fact, tucked in among the jokes. These itinerant traders often kept entire neighborhoods alive with stories of distant lands they stitched casually into local nights. Without them, the empire itself would have seemed infinitely smaller. With them, strangers at small wooden tables became travelers, orbiting across oceans without ever leaving their benches. A curious, lesser-known detail: the stories weren't always exotic or grand. Sometimes the talk focused on peculiar day-to-day things. What sort of bread Syrians burned fastest? What Egyptian inns used to bribe travelers into staying? Or how Indian pepper made people hiccup so loudly one host thought his guest possessed by spirits. You smile, knowing these tiny oddities probably outlived the grand speeches. Ordinary nonsense always does. The ney flute huffs softly again in the corner, folding beneath these stories. The lute plucks a few shadows of melody, as if providing background music to already rich tales. You glance at your empty dish of candied fruit, chew an invisible sugar grain from memory, and realize the stories taste sweeter than the food itself. They're sticky, they cling, even when you try to let them drift. Historians still wonder whether these stories were believed fully by their audiences. Did listeners actually picture entire cities as pure marble and gold when a merchant described them? Or did they nod politely, aware that exaggeration ran faster than the fastest horse? No one knows. But that's the secret charm. It didn't matter to hear, in this dim and drowsy room, of a desert gale, or a glittering palace, or a ship nearly drowning under candy, gave the illusion of travel. And sometimes an illusion is softer and more necessary than truth. Another story drifts across the room now. A sailor, insisting he knew the secret to staying awake longer than coffee, simply listening to the creak of the masts on the open ocean. The table laughs knowingly. Coffee may not have been his companion at sea, but here on land, no one doubts this new devotion. You sit back, soothed further into the half-dream, realizing you've become part of it. To another listener in this ongoing world library, another shadow among hundreds who leaned forward at tales of deserts, camels, and ships. Your attention lingers as the merchants laugh, their hands sketching the shapes of unseen lands in midair, steam curling around them like punctuation. The coffee house doesn't sleep, but it dreams with eyes open, mouths buzzing, hands gesturing. The merchants' voices rock you, the way waves might, gently repetitive, steadily warm. You sip your cupless air now, tasting the faint spice still clinging to your tongue, and let the night carry you deeper into this strange, timeless tide. ****. Not every night inside an Ottoman coffee house was shaped by poets, traveling merchants, or suspicious whispers about sultans. Sometimes, perhaps most often, it was the ordinary crowd who carried the whole affair on their shoulders. You lean deeper into your bench, watching the rhythm of the evening shift again away from distant tales and toward the safer, sillier, more comforting ground of everyday mischief. The tailor is here, still tugging threads off his sleeve like his work refused to clock out. He's traded in his needle for a tiny cup, and he talks with grand hand motions about the absurd number of buttons a single robe needed this season. Across from him, a scribe rubs ink stains from his fingers with no success, claiming each smear is a medal of honor given only to men who wrote too much, too late. A barber leans between them, gesturing dramatically with his comb because, yes, of course he brought his comb with him, as though startled hair emergencies might erupt at midnight. Here's the comforting fact. Ottoman coffee houses were open to almost everyone: bakers, carpenters, boatmen, scribes, not just elites, not just poets wrapped in silk, but the heartbeat of the city, the shop workers and neighbors who shaped the hours of the day and then came here to shape the night. They exchanged gossip like currency, exchanged complaints like prayer, exchanged laughter like bread. And here's your lesser-known quirk. Ordinary men often staged playful pranks and competitions in these spaces. There were reports of barbers pretending to diagnose illness in each other based on how their mustaches curled, scribes penning ridiculous fake proclamations and slipping them under cups just to see who would read them aloud. Even bakers exaggerating the weight of bread they had heroically hauled through traffic. Mischief was not an accident here. It was the very point. Tonight, the barber is narrating, to anyone willing to listen, how he convinced a customer that shaving with chilled water instead of hot was a sign of nobility. His audience nearly doubles over with laughter, not because it's all that witty, but because the man apparently believed him and paid extra. The tailor raises his tiny porcelain cup in salute, adding a toast to all noble beards of the empire. Your own smile stretches easily now. It's impossible not to. You recognize exactly what's happening. The caffeine has gone from a buzzing silence breaker to a cheerleader for silliness. Too much energy and no proper outlet. They're inventing contests, weaving useless debates, and spreading small pranks about robe buttons and bread sizes like secret treasures. Still, beneath it, you sense the deeper need. It answers these playful evenings, made men feel part of something, not just customers or workers, but members of a nightly riddle, one built of laughter, bitterness, and smoke. Community brewed quicker than the coffee itself. And here rises the classic open question. Were these harmless antics the true purpose of coffee houses? Historians still argue. Was the whole culture built less on caffeine and more on camaraderie, less on revolution and more on the sheer relief of laughing at button counts and barber tricks? There's no final answer, only this momentary glimpse. You blink slowly as the laughter subsides into gentle chatter once more. They sip lingering dregs. You do too, though your cup by now might be more imagination than reality. The barber sets down his comb as though it were a royal scepter, and the scribe shuffles papers he doesn't need to shuffle, because habits survive even in leisure. The lantern, guttering above your head, flickers toward gold again. The air is dense with the warmth of smoke and spice, but lightened too by the echoes of harmless mischief. There's something tender in it, something reassuring. Sleep finds you not in silence, but in ordinary jokes and crumbly laughter. You sink deeper into your seat, eyelids fluttering, warmed by the understanding that much of history rests not in great speeches or daring voyages, but inside rooms like this room's, where stray jokes about mustaches and robe buttons soften the sharp edge of the world outside. By now the air feels as dense as a woven rug layer over layer of voices, laughter, and steam. You've followed the thread of conversation, from poets to mischief makers, and your cup is slowly emptying again. Then you notice another corner of the room, where the pace is different, slower, even more deliberate. Here sit the dreamers, the philosophers, the ones who wear weary eyes like medals, who look as though they've stayed awake for a decade already and intend to stay awake for another simply because they can. A man in a modest robe leans forward, stirring his coffee though. There is nothing left to stir. He asks quietly, as if daring the night itself to answer. What shape is the universe? His neighbor considers, scratches his beard, and suggests a cosmic sphere. The third nods gravely, then yawns halfway through his confirmation. Clearly, cosmic mysteries are exhausting, even for those who claim caffeine grants them immortality. Fact, time. Ottoman coffee houses gave space to intellectuals and scholars, people who had studied theology, astronomy, mathematics. Dialogues here often mirrored the sophisticated debates of museums and palaces, though without velvet chairs or gilded ceilings, and with a good deal more yawning. They weren't publishing papers in this haze of smoke and laughter. They were testing ideas aloud, letting bold theories collide like cups clinking. But here's a quirky detail. Despite the occasional cosmic ambitions of these debates, much of what was discussed meandered into very earthly corners. After 3 yawns and half an argument about the stars, the philosophers drift toward more practical enigmas. Why cats always know the warmest spot in a house, or whether drinking coffee upside down might magnify its effect. Someone even claims deadly serious that camels dream, and that their dreams alone keep the desserts fertile. The others nod respectfully, some solemn, some barely suppressing grins. The drum is silent, the lute resting, only the hush of talk carries the moment now. You sip along, joining them in spirit, asking yourself questions no one can answer. Is eternity wide and flat? Or is it a circle? Or is it, as your heavy eyelids argue, just a long night stretched so far that dawn begins to feel mythical? Historians still puzzle about this element of coffee culture. We know the philosophers came. We know the talk spilled beyond borders of theology and into the odd workings of everyday life. But did they shape real political or scientific change? Or did they simply exercise the art of musing, dressing up ordinary insomnia in cosmic robes? It's impossible to tell, and maybe unnecessary. The yawning grows hilarious now. A man insists he is closer to truth the more he yawns. Another counters that yawns are evidence of emptiness being poured out, clearing space for divine inspiration. You nearly snort into your coffee. At least they make boredom entertaining, and yet, the atmosphere soothes you, the mixture of lofty wonder with low-key human comedy. The voices aren't sharp. They're as soft-edged as the smoke that curls endlessly around them. These dreamers, these philosophers, they don't produce answers. They produce rhythm. A rhythm of curiosity, of eyelids drooping, but minds still flicking open like lantern wicks. Your own breath slows with theirs. Perhaps yawning is contagious across centuries, because before long, your jaw stretches with a heavy sigh, too. And in that moment, you realize you've joined their side. Between philosophers and dreamers, still awake, still wondering, yet also floating softly toward the place where answers never fully matter. Asterisk, asterisk. The yawns of the philosophers are still echoing gently in the smoke when your ears catch a new stir from outside. The door creaks. A gust of colder air brushes across your cheek, and in walks a man with salt clinging to his cloak. His shoes are scuffed with sea dust, and his scent carries something sharper than spices or smoke, brine, tar, and travel. Suddenly, the room shifts again. The energy of the port has entered the coffee house. Asterisk, you watch as he joins one of the larger tables, greeted like an old friend. Before long, talk drifts seawards, ships, cargo, cities across water. Your head turns, curiosity burning like the wicks above. Coffee hasn't just lingered in Ottoman nightlife anymore. It's traveling, sailing, boarding carts, and caravans. Soon, it's heading westward, destined to become Europe's sleepless obsession. Asterisk, one solid historical fact sparks here. It was through Ottoman ports and trade routes that coffee reached places like Venice, London, and Paris. Seafaring merchants carried beans not just as cargo, but as stories, twisting tales of this black drink that made men cheerful, stirred minds, and sometimes prompted authorities to panic. Venice had its first coffee house in the 17th century, thanks to these very ships docking in Ottoman waters. Asterisk. Your lesser-known detail is sweeter, in some letters from the period. European visitors confessed sheer bewilderment at Ottoman brewing. They compared it to ink, or complained that so much sludge at the bottom was barbaric, and yet they tried it, and they brought it home, tweaking recipes with milk, sugar, filtered pots, until an entirely new European ritual was born. But Europe's love affair with coffee had its roots right here, in the smoky, lamp-lit closeness of places like this. Asterisk. The sailor takes a sip, wincing perhaps. He, too, finds the bitterness heavier than sea salt, but he drinks anyway, holding court with tales of loading beans by the sackful. He claims one ship nearly sank under the weight of Yemeni cargo. His audience bursts with laughter, calling him dramatic. Maybe he is, but exaggeration is the favorite passenger of any coffeehouse tale. Asterisk. And here's where historiography shrugs and raises a brow. Was the Ottoman Empire exporting coffee, purposefully seeing the beans spread as economic power, or was it luck, chance, simple trade? Did Europe steal the drink, or adopt it naturally, in cultural ripple? Still an open conversation, one that remains unsettled. Much like your coffee grounds swirling in an almost empty cup. Asterisk. Your own imagination drifts beyond the coffeehouse walls now. You picture waves slapping against wooden hulls, barrels rocking, sailors humming to pass the time. Somewhere below deck, beans shift softly against each other. A mountain of tiny seeds, destined to reshape mornings across continents. The quiet revolutions, the bleary head clearing, the pen moving faster, the philosopher staying awake to write are all packed tightly in those sacks. Empires carried in bean form. Asterisk. Among your neighbors, the sailor's stories settle into the night's rhythm. Laughter shakes loose again. Someone pours another round. Pipes flare with glowing tips. But to you, the impact of travel is heavier. You realize, while these walls feel timeless, the drink they hold is about to explode outward, unfurling across oceans and centuries. Tonight, though, you get to sip it right here, at the hinge of history, warm, bitter, fragrant, and still wrapped in the intimacy of shadow. Asterisk. The sailor rests his elbows on the table. He looks indulgently tired, as though his whole body is a mast swaying in salt wind. And even though his eyes are bright with story, his head droops just a little. Awake, but weary. A contradiction that belongs perfectly in this place. Asterisk. Your cup is refilled again, though maybe it's the 5th or 6th time. The count seems silly now. What matters is the comfort, the way the surface gleams. The steam rises, and the night carries you along, like one of those cargo ships. Heading toward dawn, you pretend is still far away. The sailor's voice drifts into softer tones, his words blending with the hum of the room. And as you shift your gaze, you notice something different. Not the coffee itself, not the steam or its bitter perfume, but the vessels in which it arrives. Your cup, slender and small in your hand, gleams faintly blue and white in the lamplight. You tilt it, and the patterns on its sides sway like water. A vine twisting lazily, a delicate tulip blooming in glaze, tiny brushstrokes carefully laid 400 years ago. Suddenly, you realize coffee might end up inside you, but beauty lingers outside, in the cup that carries it. Asterisk. Fact to pocket here. Ottoman artisans, particularly in the town of Iznik, were masters of ceramic, tile, and porcelain arts during the empire's prime. Their bright cobalt blues, leafy reds, and detailed tulip motifs became not only decoration for mosques and palaces, but also seeped into everyday wares, which means a humble coffee cup, tipped languidly in the fingers of a tired poet, is in fact part of the empire's artistic bloodstream. Asterisk. You roll the porcelain between your fingertips. It's thinner than you imagined. Not a clunky mug like the modern kind, lurking in your kitchen cabinet. These cups, called fincon, are light, fragile, almost absurdly small. Coffee houses prized them not for quantity, but for finesse. The drink's power wasn't measured in gallons, but in concentrated sips as elegant as verse, as deliberate as a lute's pluck. One swallow at a time, asterisk, and then the quirk, because the grounds were never filtered. The bottom of each cup held a muddy swath thick as wet paint. Once emptied, the vessel often doubled as a playful divination tool, flipped over onto its saucer, swirled, tapped, turned upright again so that the grounds stuck to insides in wavering patterns. Then came predictions. Ah, yes, this looks like a horse, which means a journey. Or, this is obviously an elongated fishtail. You will meet a tall stranger, whether meaningful or not. Fortune-telling cups made even bitter sludge entertaining. Asterisk across the room. You see someone practicing this very thing. A man peers seriously into what looks like a random smudge, nods solemnly, as though interpreting the destiny of nations, then bursts into laughter when his friend claims it looks like a donkey wearing a hat. The table shakes with exhausted chuckles, the coffee forgotten for a moment as porcelain itself becomes performer. You sip warm bitterness while smiling around the rim of beauty. Asterisk, it occurs to you that design was not window dressing here. The patterns on cups and tiles reflected Ottoman aesthetics of harmony, geometry, balance, floral motifs hinting at paradise. Even in a noisy shop where jokes leaned crude and debates ran dangerous, the cup rested as an object of elegance. A reminder that beauty clung to even ordinary nights. Asterisk. Historians still scratch their scalps over the fortune-telling side of this. Was it rudimentary superstition? A social game masquerading as destiny? Or did some believe genuine insight came through these dark stains? Hard to decide. Maybe no one in the room really cared. Maybe destiny was just an excuse to laugh at another donkey in a hat. Asterisk, your fingers tighten carefully on the fragile glass. Imagine all the mugs you've known in your lifetime, hefty, with slogans, with chipped edges. None could compete with the delicacy of this. You sip, and you can feel the artisan's hours baked in, the brushstrokes humming, the glaze catching, the whole cup whispering, "Don't drop me. I've survived for centuries for this exact moment." Asterisk, you lean back once more, cradling art and brew together, realizing you don't just drink Ottoman coffee, you cradle Ottoman beauty. A work of art disguised as tape. The room rumbles again with poetry, mischief, snores. But the chalice in your hand reminds you that beauty seeps into every shadow, even into the tiniest cups, heavy with grounds. Asterisk, the porcelain cup rests light as a feather in your hand. You tip it back for another sip, then pause, realizing this dark little drink doesn't belong only here. It belongs in many places, sometimes dressed differently, but humming the same heartbeat. The stories, the rituals, the small debates, they swirl not only in the Ottoman world, but ripple outward through connections. Tonight, the walls of the coffee house seem to stretch wider, dissolving into comparisons with other lands, other nights, other fires glowing in the dark. Asterisk, your first thought drifts southward to Ethiopia. Fact, the birthplace of coffee, as legend tells, it goats dancing madly after eating red berries. Their poor shepherd, puzzled by his caffeinated flock. This origin tale traveled almost as stubbornly as the beans themselves, surviving centuries of retelling. In Ethiopia, people roasted coffee ceremonially, sometimes laying fragrant grasses around the brewing pot, turning preparation into a ritual as sacred as meal or prayer. You picture yourself seated not in this smoky Ottoman den but rather within a modest Ethiopian home, the air rich with incense and roasted bean, women pouring brew in long, deliberate arcs into rows of small clay cups. Short sips, long evenings. Asterisk, then east, to Persia. Here, coffee houses bore their own flavor places, where chess games and storytelling contests thrummed. Patrons gathered like actors waiting their turn. Their games drew crowds as intently as lute songs. Some accounts speak of heated disputes, not about politics, but about who cheated in backgammon, or who dared to misquote Persian verse. Quirky, isn't it? Thousands of miles from Istanbul, the disputes still sounded oddly similar. Laughter, arguments, the joy of being together longer than daylight allowed. Asterisk, and then further east still you picture Yemen's devotion, already centuries old before the Ottomans rose in love with these beans. Yemenite cups brewed strong, thick, unfiltered, consumed slowly, reverently, often tied to Sufi rituals of wakefulness. Coffee wasn't frivolous there. It was spiritual strength, a way to resist dozing during meditations, to stay awake for chanting long into night. From Yemen's hills, the beans carried themselves across seas and deserts to sit. Right now, inside the cup you lift. Asterisk finally. Your thoughts skip further ahead to Europe, where coffee found itself politely filtered, softened with milk, sweetened until its bite dulled to a whisper. It became the darling of salons, the academic murmur of universities, even sewn into the stitching of newspapers. But sitting here, surrounded by Ottoman smoke and chatter, you feel the rawer pulse of its aversion less mannered, more alive, one that stains cups, tongues, and fingertips as much as it brightens minds. Asterisk historians still debate this spread. Was it linear, skipping neatly from Ethiopia to Yemen, to Ottoman ports to Europe, or more web-like, tangled through merchant detours and hidden exchanges? Trade routes rarely obey straight lines. After all, was there a moment coffee was born? Or simply countless small sparks smoldering across the map, until one day the world realized all of them had joined into one flame? Nobody truly knows. Perhaps that mystery itself tastes faintly in every cup. Asterisk, you roll your last sip on your tongue, sharp and bitter, and smile softly. Wherever coffee went to priests or poets, traders or tailors, its story sounds familiar. Nights stretched beyond their size, laughter echoing further than walls, thoughts blooming wider than daylight allowed, across Ethiopia, Persia, Yemen, the Ottoman world, and beyond. People avoided yawns just a little longer for the same comforting reason you do now. Asterisk. The philosophers have drifted into murmurs. The sailors have nodded toward their elbows. The barber is still exaggerating mustache tragedies. You sit among them, joining a conversation that stretches across continents, across oceans, across centuries. Somehow, in this tiny porcelain cup, you hold a link between every wakeful night and sleepless mind. The steam from your cup has thinned to faint wisps now, yet the longer you sit here, the more it feels as though this coffee house is less a physical building than a shared question wrapped in smoke. You glance around. The poet's drowsy, yet still whispering. The philosopher slumped mid-yawn. The tailor chuckling faintly about robe buttons. The sailor tilting backwards, as though still on rolling decks. Everyone wide awake, but everyone exhausted too. Why? What pulled them here? Let them linger. Made them resist the lure of warm beds waiting at home. Historians, bless their endlessly furrowed brows, still wonder. The official explanations, stimulating caffeine, intellectual companionship, political debate don't seem wrong, but they feel too tidy, too sharp-edged for this fuzzy, drowsy room. Maybe it wasn't just wakefulness that people drank. Maybe staying awake was code for something deeper. Perhaps it was company. The warmth of strangers slouched into friends by simply enduring the same bitter drink together. Or perhaps it was the noise itself, resistance against the silence of night, against the loneliness that might seep in if streets fell fully quiet. Or maybe, one could argue humbly, it was procrastination. After all, who among us hasn't prolonged bedtime with just one more story, one more sip, one more laugh at a ridiculous barber anecdote? Think of it. Sleeplessness itself as a shared ritual. The Ottomans weren't only drinking coffee. They were drinking possibility, delaying the ending of a day for as long as they could. Some say the Empire feared these sleepless places because talk could spark rebellion. Others suggest officials tolerated them because, after all, even plotting sounds less threatening when whispered through laughs in a smoky room. Both might be true, neither might be. This is where historians shrugged, sip whatever keeps them awake at their desks, and admit, we don't really know. A quirk drifts at the edge of history. Some travelers claimed that locals justified their obsession with half-serious claims that coffee might cure almost everything: headaches, melancholy, even heartbreak. Imagine that cup after tiny cup, promising not just wakefulness but emotional renovation. Was it belief? Was it marketing? Hard to know. Perhaps they simply liked the excuse. But for you tonight, the truth hardly matters. You feel soft laughter under your ribs, the comfort of fire glow on your cheek, the weight of centuries cushioning your mind. What if staying awake wasn't about rebelling, or philosophizing, or even outlasting the lantern oil? What if it was about savoring, stretching the night, stretching each moment, resisting endings? Your cup sits empty, its grounds thick at the bottom, shapes waiting to be divined by someone who swears destiny is in there somewhere. Half the room nods drowsily, eyes glazed, words stretched thinner, and still, no one leaves. The benches creak as bodies recline, but refuse to surrender. You smile knowingly. The riddle of these coffee houses is not in their beans, but their hearts. Awake or asleep, what they treasured most was being here, together, when the rest of the city had already surrendered to dreams. Asterisk, asterisk, the night outside is thinning now, and you can sense it even here in this shaded chamber. The lanterns sputter, just slightly, their oil lower, their flames less boastful. Someone yawns without shame this time, not disguising it as a philosophical revelation. The lute is quiet, the drumlong set down. Here, in the deepest hours, the room itself feels like it's folding softly, as though it might curl up into a sigh and rest. Asterisk, your cup, once eager with steam, now sits empty on the table before you. The porcelain is warm but fading, the patterns on it gentler in this dimmed hour. The poets mutter half-lines with eyes closed, like children too stubborn to stop playing even though sleep has wrapped its hand on their shoulder. The barber snores at last, his comb resting dramatically like a knight laying down his sword. The sailor is slouched, head against the wall, mumbling names of foreign ports, even as his lips form the heavy breath of dreams. Asterisk, you stand slowly, though no chair scrapes, no bench groans. Tonight you stand easily, as though drifting up from the weightlessness of the scene. The room feels both heavy and light, heavy with smoke embedded into every beam and wall, light with laughter still clinging faintly to the air. The night has been lived fully here, wrestled to exhaustion, and now dawn is claiming its small, inevitable victory. Asterisk, one fact lingers in your mind as you move toward the door. Coffee houses like this stretched all across the Ottoman Empire, thousands of them by the 17th century. Some grew grand and politically nervous, others stayed small neighborhood haunts, but all of them shared the same hum, that sense of soft rebellion against sleep, of sweetness weaved into bitterness, of togetherness stitched beneath smoke. Asterisk, then comes the lovely, lesser-known scene. Even as dawn arrived, attendants often poured just one more cup, puny though it was, some half-mock ritual of farewell to the night. The joke being that nobody really needed more caffeine at sunrise. But still they sipped anyway, as if night's spell couldn't quite end without a final swallow. Tonight, you imagine yourself taking that same last sip, bitter and stubborn and perfect. Asterisk, historians, of course, still wonder what really powered these places. Revolution, poetry, community, fortune-telling sludge. Perhaps all, perhaps none. Tonight, the only certainty is that coffee houses held a kind of magic, unmatched. Elsewhere, the ability to make wakefulness feel less lonely, and exhaustion feel like camaraderie. Asterisk, as you step through the doorway, dawn brushes you immediately, faint pink stretching across rooftops. The call of a rooster wobbles somewhere, and the streets begin their slow, soft stirring. You walk down cobbled stones, heart humming, body drowsy, mind strangely alert. Shadows shorten, merchants stir, and you clutch the warm trace of bitterness left on your tongue. Asterisk, the coffee house behind you sinks into silence finally. But for you, the story lingers, curling in your lungs like smoke you never fully exhaled. You have walked through chatter, poetry, music, suspicion, spice, merchants' tales, scholars, yawns, and the endless hum of cups. And now, at day's edge, you retreat drowsy, yet comforted, a lone shadow stepping into the softened, waking city. Asterisk, the night has ended. Your mind is awake, and yet your body, like theirs, is ready to surrender, at last, to gentle sleep.